All right. Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. We're tackling something a little different, a little bit meta today.
Oh, meta. I like it.
Yeah, we're diving deep into decision making. And our guide for this is, well, it's Annie Duke's book, How to Decide, which honestly, it's a really intriguing read.
Yeah, it is. And I think it's particularly interesting because of Annie Duke's background, right? I mean, she's not your typical, uh, self-help guru or business consultant. She's a former professional poker player.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of what drew me to the book in the first place, right? It's
Yeah.
like, okay, someone who's made a living making high-stakes decisions under pressure probably has some insights that, we could all benefit from.
Absolutely. And, it's funny because I was actually telling a friend about the book the other day, and I made a little slip up. I accidentally said that Annie Duke was a chess player, not a poker player.
Oh, wow.
And my friend immediately said, "Oh, so it's all about planning out every move perfectly." And it just struck me how much we as a society, we kind of equate good decision making with always getting it right. Like, if you make the right decision, the outcome will always be good. And if the outcome is bad, you must have made the wrong decision.
Yeah, it's like we're obsessed with this idea of always being right. And I mean, I get it, right? Nobody likes making mistakes. But Duke, she really challenges that notion in the book.
Hmm.
She makes this really clear distinction between what she calls outcome quality and decision quality.
Exactly. And she argues that we should be focusing much more on the process of how we make decisions rather than just the outcome. Because sometimes you can make a really good decision and things just don't work out the way you hoped. Or, the flip side, sometimes you stumble into a good outcome even if you didn't really go through a very thoughtful decision-making process.
Right. So it's not about always winning.
Right. No, no, not at all. I mean, winning is great, obviously. But I think what Duke's getting at is that it's much more important to focus on making the best possible decision with the information that you have at the time.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But how do we do that? How do we actually improve the quality of our decisions?
Well, that's where Duke's framework comes in.
Okay, tell me more about that.
So she breaks down the decision-making process into these 4 key steps. First, you have to define the decision that you're actually trying to make. What is the specific problem or opportunity that you're facing? Then you need to identify your options. What are the different paths that you could take? Next, you have to evaluate the potential outcomes of each option. What are the possible consequences, both good and bad, of each choice? And finally, you have to consider the likelihood of each outcome actually happening. How probable is it that each scenario will actually play out?
Wow, okay, that's a lot to unpack. I mean, it seems pretty straightforward on the surface, but I can imagine that it can get pretty complex when you're actually trying to apply it to a real-life situation.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, decision making is rarely simple, right? But I think the beauty of Duke's framework is that it gives you a structure, a process to follow, and that can be incredibly helpful, especially when you're dealing with a decision that feels really overwhelming or high stakes.
Right, it's like having a roadmap, right?
Hmm.
Instead of just wandering around in the dark hoping you stumble upon the right path.
Yeah, exactly. And, I think one of the things that I really appreciate about Duke's approach is that she also acknowledges the role of uncertainty in decision making. We can't predict the future, and there's always going to be an element of risk involved in any decision that we make.
Especially in the world we live in now, right? It seems like everything is changing so rapidly.
Oh, for sure. I mean, think about it. Like, even a few years ago, who could have predicted the rise of, artificial intelligence or the metaverse or, insert any other major technological or social shift here?
I know, it's like just when you think you've got things figured out, the whole game changes.
Right. And that's where I think Duke's background as a poker player really comes in handy. Because in poker, you're constantly dealing with incomplete information, right? You
Wow.
don't know what cards your opponents are holding, and you don't know what card's going to come up next. So you have to make decisions based on probabilities and calculated risks and be prepared to adapt as the situation unfolds.
That's a really interesting analogy. So how do we get better at like embracing that uncertainty? Because I think for a lot of people, myself included, like uncertainty is just, it's scary, it's uncomfortable. We want guarantees, right? We want to know that we're making the right choice.
I think we all do on some level. But you know what? The truth is there are no guarantees in life. And I think trying to eliminate all uncertainty, it can actually backfire. It can lead to analysis paralysis, where you spend so much time overthinking and second guessing yourself that you never actually make a decision. Or it can lead you to make decisions based on fear rather than on what you actually want or what you think is the best course of action.
Okay, so how do we avoid that? How do we find that balance between gathering enough information to make an informed decision, but not getting so bogged down in the details that we just freeze up.
Well, I think one thing that's really helpful is to set a deadline for yourself. Give yourself a certain amount of time to research and gather information. And then when that deadline arrives, make a decision. And then once you've made the decision, commit to it. Don't keep going back and forth, second guessing yourself.
That's good advice. And I think it also ties into what Duke says about, viewing decisions as learning opportunities.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, one of the key takeaways from the book, for me, is this idea of cultivating a learning mindset when it comes to decision making. Instead of viewing decisions as like these all or nothing bets where you either win or lose, try to approach them as experiments. Like, okay, I'm going to try this and let's see what happens. And then, regardless of the outcome, take some time to reflect on what you learned from the experience. What worked? What didn't work? What would you do differently next time?
So it's about like turning every decision, even the ones that don't turn out the way we hoped, into a valuable data point. Yeah.
Exactly. It's like every decision is an opportunity to gather more information about yourself, about your preferences, about your risk tolerance, about how the world works. And the more data points you have, the better equipped you'll be to make better decisions in the future.
And I think that's a really powerful way to reframe our relationship with decision making, right?
Yeah.
Because it takes some of the pressure off. It's like, okay, if I make a mistake, it's not the end of the world. It's just a learning opportunity.
Right. And it's also important to remember that even the best decision makers in the world, they don't get it right all the time. Everyone makes mistakes. The key is to learn from those mistakes and to keep improving your decision-making process over time.
So how do we do that? How do we actually put this learning into practice?
Well, I think one of the simplest but most effective things that you can do is to start keeping a decision journal. Whenever you make a significant decision, just take a few minutes to write down what was the decision, what factors did you consider, what were your expectations, and then after the decision has played out, how did it actually turn out? And what did you learn from the experience?
That's a really good idea. I'm going to start doing that myself. And I think it's also helpful to, talk to other people about their decision-making processes. Pick their brains, see how they approach complex decisions, what frameworks or tools they use, what lessons they've learned along the way.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think we can learn so much from each other's experiences, both good and bad.
Definitely. And I think, as we wrap up this deep dive, it's important to remember that even small improvements in our decision-making process can have a huge ripple effect over time.
Right.
Because every decision that we make, it leads to another decision and another and another.
Exactly. It's like our lives are essentially just a series of decisions, right? So the better we get at making those decisions, the better our lives are likely to be.
I like that. It's a very empowering thought. And I want to leave our listeners with this question. What decision are you facing right now, big or small, that you could apply some of these concepts to? Maybe it's a career decision, a relationship decision, a financial decision, or even just, deciding what to have for dinner tonight. The point is, by being more deliberate and thoughtful in our choices, we can create a future that is more aligned with our values and our goals.
Absolutely. And I think the most important thing is to just be kind to yourself along the way. Decision making is hard. There's no one right way to do it. So just keep experimenting, keep learning, and keep growing.
I love that. All right, well, that's a wrap on our deep dive into decision making with Annie Duke's How to Decide. Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.